Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles. I am the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can give us a call or a text at 812-550-6234. You can also send email to info@riverridgechurch.org. Those are both great ways to get us your comments or questions or requests for a future topic of study on this TV program. You can also get in suggestions for a radio program or a bulletin article. Those are both other ways that you can connect with us and find more of this information, this preaching, I suppose, that I'm putting out there on a weekly basis. You can find all of these TV programs that have aired in the past on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/River Ridge Church of Christ, and you can find all of the past bulletin articles on our website, riverridgechurch.org. I can't do anything about it if you miss the radio show, so you'll just have to tune into that on Sundays at 2 p.m. on 98.5 FM or 1400 AM if you're farther out from Evansville. Today we are tackling Jeremiah. Well, this is terrifying. See, depending on how you count, Jeremiah is the longest or among the longest books in the Bible. How can there be any question, you might ask? Well, it has to do with whether you're counting words in an English translation or in Hebrew. In Hebrew, Jeremiah is longer than Genesis, and the longest book in the Bible. In most English translations, Genesis edges out the win, but some translations make Ezekiel or Psalms drastically more wordy than either of those two. But then, of course, you've got to consider that the books of Samuel and Kings and Chronicles are divided into 1st and 2nd in our Bibles today, yet they were written as single works that were just too long to fit in one scroll as a practical matter. But if you were picking a book of the Bible to read and you landed on one of those, then you probably would consider 1st and 2nd Kings or 1st and 2nd Chronicles back to back, again, as a practical matter. So I suppose Jeremiah has some competition as far as length is concerned, but that really doesn't do justice to the problem here and why it is terrifying to tackle Jeremiah today. Let me give you an example to illustrate this point. Let's read from 2 Kings chapter 24, beginning in verse 18. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah, different Jeremiah, by the way, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For because of the anger of the Lord, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he cast them out from his presence, and Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. And in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem, and laid siege to it. And they built siege works all around it, so the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls, by the king's garden, and the Chaldeans were around the city. And they went in the direction of the Arabah, but the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. Then they captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in chains, and took him to Babylon. Well, that got grisly in a hurry, didn't it? But while the names, dates, and exact details might have been a bit overwhelming, the basic gist of the story is easy to follow. King Zedekiah was a bad guy, and he hastened God's judgment on the nation of Judah. The Babylonians came, besieged Jerusalem, and eventually took the city, after which they executed the king's kids right in front of him, and then blinded him so it would be his last visual memory, and hauled him away to Babylon as a trophy. That didn't take as many words, but it's the whole list of relevant details, and it's fairly easy to remember. There are sections of the book of Jeremiah that are like that. In fact, chapter 52 contains this same story, almost word for word, and there are several more sections of the book that are written in narrative format, just telling us what happened and when. And then there's stuff like chapter 47. Thus says the Lord, Behold, waters are rising out of the north, and shall become an overflowing torrent. They shall overflow the land and all that fills it, the city and those who dwell in it. Men shall cry out, and every inhabitant of the land shall wail at the noise of the stamping of the hoofs of his stallions, at the rushing of his chariots, at the rumbling of their wheels. The fathers look not back to their children, so feeble are their hands, because of the day that is coming to destroy all the Philistines, to cut off from Tyre and Sidon every helper that remains. For the Lord is destroying the Philistines, the remnant of the coastlands of Caphtor. Baldness has come upon Gaza, Ashkelon has perished. O remnant of their valley, how long will you gash yourselves? Ah, sword of the Lord, how long till you are quiet? Put yourself into your scabbard, rest and be still. How can it be quiet when the Lord has given it a charge? Against Ashkelon and against the seashore he has appointed it. It's pretty clear that God has a bone to pick with the Philistines and promises judgment to come, but the reason is just not clear. The timing is not obvious, and the language is much more flowery and poetic than what we saw before. Jeremiah bounces back and forth between these two modes, although most of the second half is more on the prose narrative side of things. Most of the prophecies are aimed at the people of Judah and Jerusalem, but otherwise they're pretty much like that one about the Philistines. Flowery, but fairly understandable. There's nowhere near the level of apocalyptic, figurative symbolism as we would find in Daniel, Ezekiel, portions of Isaiah, or in the New Testament, Revelation. Which is nice, because Jeremiah has another way to confuse us. Let's read from chapter 36, verses 1 through 4. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Take a scroll, and write on it all the words that I have spoken to you against Israel and Judah and all the nations from the day I spoke to you from the days of Josiah until today. It may be that the house of Judah will hear all the disaster that I intend to do to them, so that every one may turn from his evil way, and that I may forgive their iniquity and their sin. Then Jeremiah called Baruch the son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote on a scroll, at the direction of Jeremiah, all the words of the Lord that he had spoken to him. This sounds like a self-reference, like Jeremiah is dictating to his secretary Baruch the story of how he dictated a book to his secretary Baruch, who is still taking down dictation in the very same book, like one of those infinite regression pictures, I guess. But that's not quite right. Jeremiah sends Baruch to read this scroll at the temple. A bunch of stuff happens, and eventually the prophecies make their way to the king. This is a different king now, Jehoiakim, who is the brother of that Zedekiah guy we already talked about from chapter 52 and the end of the story. And since the crown typically passes from father to son and not brother to brother, I guess maybe you get a hint about the sort of political situation we're looking at here. But anyway, Jehoiakim's not a good guy either. So the officials, actually doing a fairly decent job for once, send a guy named Jehudi, who's otherwise unimportant, to read this book from Jeremiah to the king. And that's where we will pick up in the middle of verse 21. And Jehudi took it to the king and all the officials who stood beside the king. It was the 9th month, and the king was sitting in the winter house, and there was a fire burning in the firepot before him. As Jehudi read 3 or 4 columns, the king would cut them off with a knife and throw them into the fire in the firepot until the entire scroll was consumed in the fire that was in the firepot. Yet neither the king nor any of his servants who heard all these words was afraid, nor did they tear their garments. Even when Elnathan and Delaiah and Gemariah urged the king not to burn the scroll, he would not listen to them. And the king commanded to Jerahmeel, the king's son, and Seraiah the son of Azriel, and Shelemiah the son of Abdeel to seize Baruch the secretary and Jeremiah the prophet, but the Lord hid them. Now after the king had burned the scroll with the words that Baruch wrote at Jeremiah's dictation, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Take another scroll, and write on it all the former words that were in the first scroll, which Jehoiakim the king of Judah has burned. So this is obviously not quite as easy as just opening up the file and hitting print again. Jeremiah and Baruch had to start over from scratch. It sounds like the original scroll was completely consumed in the fire. That's probably what happened, but the notion of 3 or 4 columns of the text being cut off at a time is interesting, to say the absolute least. You see, the book of Jeremiah is arranged chaotically. At the very beginning, we have Jeremiah's call to prophesy, as you might expect, in chapter 1. The words of Jeremiah the son of Hilkiah, one of the priests who were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It came also in the days of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah, and until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the captivity of Jerusalem in the 5th month. This gives us an overview of the time period stretching from about 627 BC to the final fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC, although the book actually goes a bit beyond that, telling some of the story of what happened as the dust settled. From there, the prophecy begins, again as you'd expect, verse 4. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Then I said, Ah, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a youth. But the Lord said to me, Do not say, I am only a youth, for to all to whom I send you, you shall go, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said to me, Behold, I have put my words in your mouth. Well, that's a nice introduction, but the timeline gets rather confusing after this. Chapter 3, verse 6. The Lord said to me in the days of King Josiah, Have you seen what she did, etc. Okay, that's what we would expect, starting with Josiah. There are no more obvious dates until we get to chapter 21. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord when King Zedekiah sent him to Pashur the son of Malchiah and Zephaniah the priest, the son of Maaseiah, saying, Inquire of the Lord for us, for Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon is making war against us. Perhaps the Lord will deal with us according to all his wonderful deeds, and will make him withdraw from us. The Lord would not make him withdraw from them. But the more pertinent detail here is that Zedekiah is now king. This would be the year 597 at the earliest, more likely about 589 for whatever that's worth. The important thing is that Zedekiah is the final king of Judah. Remember what we read earlier about how the Babylonians took the city from him, killed his sons, and took him off to Babylon as a trophy. They didn't replace him with another king like they did when Jehoiachin was captured, or as the Egyptians did when they captured Jehoahaz before that. No, they destroyed the city and installed a governor instead who was accountable to Babylon. So, now you've got that in your mind. By chapter 21, we're dealing with the very last king of Judah. Chapter 22, verse 11. For thus says the Lord concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah his father, and who went away from this place. He shall return here no more. What? Same chapter, verse 24. As I live, declares the Lord, though Coniah the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were a signet on my right hand, yet I would tear you off and give you into the hand of those who seek your life. What? Chapter 26, verse 1. In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came from the Lord. What? Chapter 28, verse 1. In that same year, the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. What is going on here? I'm just scratching the surface of how confusing this timeline is. As you read through this very long book, you'll eventually just get used to being whisked into a different period of time with flashbacks, flash forwards, flash sidewayses, and plenty of sections where you just have no idea where this fits on the timeline. On top of this, do we talk about the Septuagint? Maybe just a bit. One of the most helpful Easter eggs I've ever found was when I acquired the Ralph's edition of the Septuagint. This is the kind of book that has forewords and multiple introductions presented in German, English, Greek, and Latin. It's a serious academic tool. Hiding inside the back cover was this tiny pamphlet, all in Latin, that functions as a handy cheat sheet for use while studying this book. On the back, it has a reference for the sections that are labeled differently in the Hebrew version and the Greek version. This happens to minor effect in Psalms and Proverbs, but Jeremiah is the winner here. The first half or so is the same, and then it just goes haywire. All the same material is there, but it's like the last half of the book went through a blender before being stitched back together in two different ways. And which arrangement came first? But back to that metaphor, like it went through a blender. Of course, they didn't have blenders when Jeremiah was written, but you know what they did have? Knives and firepots. Whether the arrangement is an actual reflection of the book having been recovered from the scraps Jehoiakim made of it, I don't know. I doubt it, because the text says that that version was consumed, and God told Jeremiah to write it all up again. But either he had a hard time remembering it all in one shot, and so put it together in haphazard fashion as it came back to him, or, more likely, there was some amount of conspiracy between Jeremiah and the Holy Spirit to give the reader a vivid understanding of what Jehoiakim had done. It's arranged, the latter half at least, almost like there was once a continuous, chronologically coherent scroll, then it was cut into chunks of 3 or 4 columns of text, which were stitched together somewhat hastily in haphazard fashion. Whatever happened, it's an incredibly effective illustration. So why did King Jehoiakim object so strongly to the words of this book? Well, that brings us to the contents. There's a word never really used by normal people, but academics, especially those delving into the political sphere in a condescending fashion, might call a rival's book, article, speech, or whatever a Jeremiad. It is not a compliment. This term, Jeremiad, is meant to dismiss the concerns voiced, and to paint them as overblown, moralizing, old-fashioned, close-minded, judgmental, and doom and gloom. It's, I suppose, somewhat ironic that people would evoke Jeremiah's prophecies in order to diminish the credibility of an opponent's predictions, because Jeremiah was proven right about every single thing he said was going to happen. But I guess that's a reflection of the way the elites with power will almost always look at anyone who challenges the idea that they're perfect and righteous and wise. Jeremiah had a hard job. From the very beginning, chapter 1, the news was not great. Let's pick up in verse 13. The word of the Lord came to me a second time, saying, What do you see? And I said, I see a boiling pot, facing away from the north. Then the Lord said to me, Out of the north disaster shall be let loose upon all the inhabitants of the land. For behold, I am calling all the tribes of the kingdoms of the north, declares the Lord, and they shall come, and every one shall set his throne at the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem, against all its walls all around, and against all the cities of Judah. And I will declare my judgments against them for all their evil in forsaking me. They have made offerings to other gods, and worshipped the works of their own hands. But you, dress yourself for work. Arise, and say to them everything that I command you. Do not be dismayed by them, lest I dismay you before them. And I, behold, I make you this day like a fortified city, an iron pillar and bronze walls against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you, but they shall not prevail against you, for I am with you, declares the Lord, to deliver you. This is exactly what happens in every detail. Jeremiah tells the people of Judah, and especially the powerful elite, that judgment is coming on account of their many, many sins. They ignore him at best. So what are their sins? He mentioned idol worship already in chapter 1. This is spiritual adultery. This nation has a binding covenant, a marriage, if you will, to God himself, and they're running around with someone else. He's pretty upset about that, as well a husband should be. On top of that, as they abandon their God, they abandon his laws too. So injustice reigns, falsehood runs rampant, and of course the weak and powerless are hit the hardest. Let's read from chapter 7. For if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly execute justice one with another, if you do not oppress the sojourner, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own harm, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your fathers, forever. Behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which is called by my name, and say, We are delivered, only to go on doing all these abominations? Has this house which is called by my name become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord. That doesn't sound like a very nice place to live, God agrees, but it actually gets worse. What happens? What always starts to happen when people reject God and his rules. What always happens when they make new gods in their own image and glorify themselves and their own power. Verse 30. For the sons of Judah have done evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house that is called by my name to defile it. And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth, because there is no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away. And I will silence in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth, and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, for the land shall become a waste. These people have no right to joy or mirth when they're behaving like this. There's no place left to go, nothing left to try. This is pure, abject evil. And the people don't see it, even though God has told them over and over not to do it. They don't value the lives of their own children, don't respect the inherent dignity and worth that God Himself invested in them. They take what God meant as the greatest gift of the physical world and treated it literally like trash to be disposed of. So yeah, God's mad. That seems like an understatement, but there's no way to fully capture the mood. Even if I wanted to try, the FCC would have a thing or two to say about the language involved. I'll try to sum it up in one sentence of God's response to this behavior. Chapter 8, verse 3. Death shall be preferred to life by all the remnant that remains of this evil family in all the places where I have driven them, declares the Lord of hosts. With each turn of the page, there's another list of sins and another expression of God's anger over them. As I mentioned, Jeremiah himself gets into trouble over all this. The first instance happens in chapter 20. Now Pashur the priest, the son of Immer, who was chief officer in the house of the Lord, heard Jeremiah prophesying these things. Then Pashur beat Jeremiah the prophet and put him in the stocks that were in the upper Benjamin gate of the house of the Lord. Okay, so that's not fun, obviously, but it could be worse, right? Chapter 26, beginning in verse 7. The priests and the prophets and all the people heard Jeremiah speaking these words in the house of the Lord. And when Jeremiah had finished speaking all that the Lord had commanded him to speak to all the people, then the priests and the prophets and all the people laid hold of him, saying, You shall die. Why have you prophesied in the name of the Lord, saying, This house shall be like Shiloh, and this city shall be desolate without inhabitant? And all the people gathered around Jeremiah in the house of the Lord. Jeremiah gets out of this. Some of the people in powerful positions at least put a stop to the feeding frenzy here, but it's not as if they turned the nation around. King Zedekiah sent for Jeremiah the prophet and received him at the third entrance of the temple of the Lord. The king said to Jeremiah, I will ask you a question. Hide nothing from me. Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, If I tell you, will you not surely put me to death? And if I give you counsel, you will not listen to me. Then King Zedekiah swore secretly to Jeremiah, As the Lord lives, who made our souls, I will not put you to death or deliver you into the hand of these men who seek your life. Zedekiah sounds reasonable here. He's a bad guy, we've established that already, and he deserves what's coming to him. But this chapter presents him in such a way that we can see his humanity. We don't have time to get more into it now, but the rest of chapter 38 is definitely worth the read. Before we move on, though, I want to point out what we read in verse 16. The king swore secretly not to have Jeremiah killed. Why does the king want to keep this secret? He's not completely in charge, is he? And he sees that he's in a precarious position, and that other people who are nominally his subjects may flout his authority and go against his wishes without fear. In fact, he's a little afraid of them himself. Real life is not fairy tale simple. It's complicated. Jeremiah's story is real life. Well, Jerusalem ends up being captured, just as Jeremiah said it would be, and Zedekiah is indeed removed from the throne and treated harshly. But what happens to Jeremiah? He's left in Jerusalem, and he's not a free man. He keeps telling his captors the word of God. Mostly at this point, it's, don't go down to Egypt. Why would they want to go down to Egypt? Because the two major powers at that time were Babylon and Egypt, and Judah was situated in the middle. In fact, they'd been ping-ponging back and forth between the Babylonian sphere of influence and the Egyptian one for a while, as the balance of power in that region kept shifting. So, now that Babylon has conquered Judah, some of the stragglers left over figure they'll go to Babylon's enemy. God says no, and Jeremiah tells them as much. Chapter 43, verse 5. But Johanan the son of Kareah and all the commanders of the forces took all the remnant of Judah who had returned to live in the land of Judah from all the nations to which they had been driven, the men, the women, the children, the princesses, and every person whom Nebuzaradan the captain of the guard had left with Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, also Jeremiah the prophet, and Baruch the son of Neriah. And they came into the land of Egypt, for they did not obey the voice of the Lord, and they arrived at Tahpanhes. After this, there are several chapters containing oracles of judgment against basically everyone in the area, and a more historically oriented retelling of the fall of Jerusalem. And that's pretty much the book. Not the most auspicious ending. Perhaps you can see why the phrase that I have associated in my mind with Jeremiah is doom and gloom. But we're not quite done yet. There's actually a lot about Jesus in Jeremiah. Chapter 3, verse 14. Return, O faithless children, declares the Lord, for I am your master. I will take you, one from a city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Zion. And I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. And when you have multiplied and been fruitful in the land, in those days, declares the Lord, they shall no more say, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind, or be remembered, or missed. It shall not be made again. At that time Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all nations shall gather to it, to the presence of the Lord in Jerusalem, and they shall no more stubbornly follow their own evil heart. Chapter 23, verses 5 and 6. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king, and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely. And this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Chapter 31, beginning in verse 31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. This is the covenant inaugurated through God's Son, Jesus. He knew from the start that the first one wasn't going to accomplish what was needed. But the world wasn't ready for the Messiah yet. So he let the story of history play out for thousands of years in anticipation. We deal with the same sin today. And I don't mean, well, they sinned and likewise we have sinned. I mean it's exactly the same sins, even if they're dressed up to look different. The same sins that are rampant in the world today were rampant in Judah when Jeremiah was prophesying to them. And God feels the same way about those sins. You can act like the people of Judah, refusing to take him seriously and ignoring those who issue his warnings, saying, well, it's never happened before. Why would it happen now? The final judgment will only happen once. Of course it hasn't happened before. Alternatively, you can heed the warning and take advantage of the forgiveness he's offering and open your heart to have his laws written on it. He wants to forgive. He wants you to know him. He wants that covenant with you. If you need help taking those steps, we'd be honored to facilitate them at River Ridge. You can reach us at 812-550-6234 or info@riverridgechurch.org. We'd love to help, and we'd love to have you among the restored people of God, called together from the four corners of the earth. You can find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh. We gather at 9 a.m. on Sundays for Bible study, 10 a.m. for worship, 4 p.m. for afternoon worship, and 7 p.m. on Wednesdays for another study. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.